We are back on Get Up, and amidst all of the quarterback questions that are out there, there are still no answers for Cam Newton, one-time league MVP, one-time first pick in the NFL draft, and now clearly on his way out of Carolina after the Panthers go ahead and sign Teddy Bridgewater. The question becomes, now what happens for Cam Newton? And I have Dan and Swagoo back. Let me start with you, Swagoo. What do you think is the best scenario for Cam Newton from this point forward?
To go to Washington and reunite with Ron Rivera, Scott Turner, the offensive coordinator, some familiarity. I'm not out on Dwayne Haskins. This doesn't mean that Dwayne Haskins can't be the future for the Washington Redskins and the starter, but I would surely bring in Cam Newton, who I have familiarity with. And we all know the story, G. This is based on Cam's health. If Cam was healthy, we wouldn't be having. He'd be one of those quarterbacks that flew off the shelf and somebody would have picked him up to be their starter. But at this point, I don't see any reason not to bring Cam in. I said it when I said Teddy Bridgewater should go to Tampa Bay and challenge Jameis Winston for a starting spot or even push him to a higher level than he could go. I feel the same way in Washington with Cam reuniting with a coaching staff he's familiar with and go push the young rookie to be who he is, and then Cam ultimately gets healthy and finds his landing spot to become a starter again.
The thing I keep thinking, Dan, is if Cam Newton was healthy, then he wouldn't be leaving Carolina right now. The Panthers know better than anyone else does. What do you think is the best scenario for Cam Newton now?
Yeah, I'd say the Los Angeles Chargers, Greeny. I mean, the Chargers for a couple of reasons. One, Anthony Lynn is an outspoken coach that he wants his quarterback to be able to move. He thinks if you're a stationary quarterback in today's NFL, you're dead. Two, the Chargers are really in a win right now mode. I mean, a top 5 defense. We all know about their weapons on the outside. A very good or much improved offensive line with the 2 additions of Trey Turner and Brian Bulaga. Greeny, I just can't wrap my head around the fact that Cam Newton's not going to be a starting quarterback. I think that the Chargers should at least entertain it. But if that doesn't happen, I also think the Chargers should draft Jordan Love at the 6th pick. So I just can't wrap my brain around Cam Newton not being a potential starting quarterback in 2020.
All right, Dan, Marcus, stay with me. Much more football as we go, but there's other news out there in the sports world. And let's start with this. The Lakers players were tested for the coronavirus yesterday, 4 days, or coming after 4 Brooklyn Nets players, tested positive. Brooklyn and the Lakers were the last opponents before play was suspended. Last night, the NBA's commissioner, Adam Silver, was with Rachel Nichols here on ESPN talking about 3 scenarios the league is considering in trying to return.
I'd say I'm looking at 3 different things here. One is, of course, when can we restart and operate as we've known it, 19,000 fans in buildings. Then option 2 is, should we consider restarting without fans? And what would that mean? Because presumably, if you had a group of players and staff around them, and you could test them and you could follow some protocol, doctors, health officials may say it's safe to play. And then a third option, are there conditions in which a group of players could compete, and maybe it's for a giant fundraiser or just for the collective good of the people, that you take a subset of players, and is there a protocol in which they can be tested and quarantined or isolated in some way, and then they can compete against each other just because people are stuck at home, and I think they need a diversion, they need to be entertained. And I just add to that point, to the extent we were the first to shut our league down, in what way can we be a first mover to help restart the economy?
So obviously the coronavirus has had an extraordinary impact on the world of sports. Here's just a small smattering of it. Baseball delaying opening day, and we don't know when they're coming back. MLS suspending their 25th anniversary season for a month, and the NHL suspending the remainder of their current season and still waiting to see where that will go. And for some answers, we are delighted to be able to bring in the commissioner of the National Hockey League, Gary Bettman, and thank you so much for doing this, Gary. You just heard from Adam Silver there talking about the way he is approaching the possibilities of a return. I would ask you the same question. What are the options for the NHL right now?
Well, the options, first of all, good morning.
Morning.
I hope you're feeling good, as are your listeners. The options are obvious, and we're all exploring them. The fact of the matter is none of us is going to be able to do anything until we get an all clear on some basis. We, too, have explored and continue to explore every scenario, which will depend on the timing of when it's safe to go out. But I think the most important thing in the short term is we should be focusing not just in sports, but we can be a good example on the fact that self-isolation is going to help the spread or reduce the spread of the coronavirus. And that's what we're focused on, keeping our players safe and setting a good example.
Obviously, that is important. I do want to hear your thoughts on what the all clear looks like. Whom is it that you are consulting with on those sorts of things? I think sports fans would be interested to hear someone in your position who has all of this, so much responsibility. From where would you get that all clear? And who are the people that you consult with and hear from?
Well, we have our own internal medical people that we use on a regular basis, and we also have consultants who are specialists in infectious disease. But more importantly, it's going to be what the local governments and perhaps the federal government tell us about what is safe. In other words, we were playing as governments one by one were suggesting, first suggesting and then ordering that sports stop playing. I mean, when the NBA stopped, obviously they had to deal with the fact that a player had tested positive and the team wouldn't take the court and they had a full building of fans. We discontinued, suspended the rest of the season a little off. We're taking a pause, but we suspended the next day because every scenario we came up when we were all playing with said that once a player tested positive, it was over in terms of being able to continue to play. After seeing what the NBA went through, it was clear to me that a positive test was inevitable, and that why wait for that to happen? Let's stop playing now. And that's why I had a call with the board on Thursday, and by Thursday night, we had taken a pause in the season. But a lot of what's going to happen, we can be as creative as sports leagues as we want, and we should be. We should be considering every scenario, whether or not we play to full buildings, whether or not we play to empty buildings. But it's going to be determined by people and organizations beyond us with the scientific and medical expertise that will tell us when it's okay to play.
Curious about the calendar. That's obviously something that there's so much uncertainty, but your season generally ends around the same time as the NBA's does. The playoffs and the Stanley Cup Finals will end sometime in early June, and then you go into their summer and the next season's considerations. So is there a point at which it will become impossible for you to continue this season or to have a playoff for this year?
Well, I believe that under the current circumstances, we can go later than we've ever gone. How late is a good question. What we want to make sure of is that we don't do anything that from this season that might impact next season having the normalcy it's supposed to have. So the two factors are timing relative to how late we can go without impacting next season, and making sure that whatever we do competitively, if we're going to complete this current season, it has to have integrity. It has to be respectful of the well over 100-year history of the Stanley Cup. And that's something we're very focused on.
And finally, I would ask you, what are you hearing from your players during this time when there was so much uncertainty for all of us? What kinds of questions are you hearing from your players?
Well, the questions that get the most asked relate to testing. We had a test positive our first 2 nights ago. There have been some players testing, but the medical advice that we're being given is that if you're asymptomatic, there's no reason to be tested because it's not going to tell you anything. So we're not over-testing. We're testing when it's appropriate. And when there's a situation, whether it's a player or a family member, an executive, we then have to go back and trace contacts that may have been had and whether or not they were meaningful contacts. But in the final analysis, getting people, whether it's sports or society as a whole, to self-isolate and reduce the spread of the coronavirus is probably the most important thing that any of us can do.
And then a quick final question for you here. I only have a moment, but I would wonder, with so many of you, we just showed how many of the different sports leagues have been impacted by this. What, if any, communication and brainstorming have you done with people like Adam Silver and the leaders of the other sports who are being impacted by this?
We've all been in contact. We're all dealing with the same issues. We're all having similar responses. I don't think anyone has a magic potion as to what the right thing to do is. We're all staying flexible. We're all considering the alternatives. We're all staying in touch with our constituents. I have at least one conference call a day with a task force that we have internally at the NHL. We're having conference calls on a regular basis with our clubs. We send memos out every day with an update. We've got to keep everybody completely informed because A, it's important that they have the information, and B, in terms of having a sense of calm, the more information people have, the more realistic they can be in dealing with this.
Gary, I really appreciate you doing this. Thank you. We'll talk again under hopefully more cheerful circumstances. You stay safe, and thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, and you too. Stay safe, stay healthy.